today that have been doing this kind of work in their community. So I'm looking forward to this. Hope you are too. And let me see, just a couple seconds here and we'll get going. Just a little background before we get started. You should see on the right-hand side of your screen Zoom webinar chat box. And what I want to suggest is if you have a question either for any of the panelists, just feel free to type it into the chat box, and I'll be monitoring that chat while they're doing their presentation. And I'll bring the questions that you have to them. We're doing this instead of turning audio on. And that's basically because we've learned that when you have as many attendees as we have today, that if everybody's got audio, it can get really distracting and kind of really create a not best experience in the world. So if you have a question, type it in chat, and I'll monitor the chat and get the questions to our panelists. And with that, I think we can go ahead and get started. So I'm assuming most of you are already familiar with the Harwood Institute for Public Innovation and the work that they've been doing for libraries, with libraries for a number of years now. And this quote that you see on the screen, you know, a lot of what we're doing with turning outward practices, we're trying to create a different path forward in our communities, one that has a greater sense of possibility and hope for people. And to do that, you know, work really requires that we work not just on this path on our own, but that we get other people to work with us and make it really make community a common enterprise again. Today's webinar is one of a series of 4 that we're doing this year. I'll be talking about 2 more that are coming up at the end of the webinar, but this one's on building allies across communities. And the premise of this really came from, as you know, a lot of people get an orientation to the Harwood practice, they go home, and then they often find it challenging or difficult to get other people to get on board with the approach or become ideally an ally in the work with them. And it's a common thing that coaches hear is, you know, sometimes people feel lonely doing this work and they struggle with how do you get other people to be on board? How do you get other organizations to understand this process and really become part of the process with you? The people today that we have presenting have done a really good job in their own communities doing this. And that's why we've invited them to come and share a little bit of their experience in building those allies in the community that makes the turned outward approach even more robust. Just a little bit about the Harwood Institute we're going to be covering. Then we're going to be moving right into the experiences that the libraries have had in building allies. We have Jason Shoup from the Assistant Director, Jackson District Library in Michigan. Elisabeth Miranda from the Blossburg Memorial Library in Pennsylvania, the director there, and Sarabeth Kaljean, director of Sarasota County Libraries and Historical Resources in Florida. Each of them will make a somewhat brief presentation. You can ask questions, like I said, in chat. And then we'll have a period of time where sort of insights and lessons learned across all of these situations. One little bit of background. These people come from very different types of libraries, and that's intentional because we know that people come into this work, they're from small libraries. Most of the libraries in the country are small. There's also people that come from large libraries. There's libraries that come that are of moderate or medium size, and these 3 people represent all those different sizes. And that was intentional. And then we'll end up the webinar with observations and some questions and whatever discussion that you want to have. A little bit before we get started just about the Harwood Institute, and I think probably many of you know this, but it's a nonprofit organization that this year has been around for 30 years. And so we're celebrating a 30-year anniversary. We started working with libraries, oh my gosh, I want to say maybe 6, 7 years ago. And since then, we've trained over 4,000 librarians. We have cohorts in multiple states. that are doing this work. You know, Miranda is from Pennsylvania, Sarabeth from Florida, Jason's from Michigan. We're also working in, you know, California, Indiana. We've got quite a few different states that we're working in. The Institute is a nonprofit, and we teach, coach, and inspire people and organizations to really solve pressing problems, change how communities work together, and basically get on a path of more hope, where people can see the work that people are trying to do in communities that actually has greater relevance and impact in their lives. So with that, what we're going to be addressing today is these questions. Really, when did you begin working with the Harwood and turning outward? What did the initial steps look like for your library? How has turning outward grown since you started this work? Where have you experienced the turning outward mindset spread outside of the library? And what were some of the key factors that enabled the spreading of the practice to happen? And then the implications that has had for building allies for your community, for your efforts that you're trying to have in your community. The opportunities that this spreading has created that might not otherwise have been possible. And where are you now in turning outward, and what comes next for you? So I'm not asked the panelists to go through this in bullet form, but to basically cover these topics as they talk about their work and community. So with that, we're going to start out with Jason from Jackson District Library in Michigan. And the Jackson District Library, as you can see on the screen here, serves all Jackson County, and it's roughly 160,000 residents. Since 1865, it employs 150 people at 14 locations. It's an administrative building, a Carnegie Library, and 12 other locations. They're currently working to deploy a new bookmobile and increase access to library resources. I've got to know Jason through some coaching I did with his library in Michigan over the past year and a half. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jason and have him tell us a little bit about their efforts in building allies across the community.
Okay, thank you, Kaljean. I wasn't warned that I would have to go first, so I guess here. So the Jackson District Library, it began its relationship with Harwood in I think 2016, and I say the library did because I actually am fairly new to the library system. What happened is the Library of Michigan and the Midwest Collaborative for Library Services, they worked together to bring the Harwood training to Michigan for Michigan libraries. And I actually received the training in a previous position, another library I was at. And Jackson sent several people to these trainings. And it was really interesting because, like very many libraries throughout the country that go through this, the library I was at before, we had the training, we were really excited about it, and we just weren't able to find the time and resources to make it happen. And then one of the really great things about Jackson is they made it happen, and there was a team in place. So a lot of what I'll be talking about is really stuff that our Harwood team at JDL has done. So it's less about me and more about them, because they have some real superstars. And I think what was really fantastic is right off the bat, they set aside time to meet regularly and talk about Harwood and really make it happen. So they went through the training, and I say they really started working with Harwood in 2016. That's when they got the final members of this 7-person team trained up, and they launched sort of our biggest success story so far with Harwood in our Concord, Michigan community. Concord is a small community. Jackson's a mostly rural county. There's about 3,000 people in Concord Township, centered around the village of Concord. And they began to hold Harwood conversations there in 2016. So these were kind of in the winter of 2016. So these were kind of our first official outside the box ones. We did some practice ones with staff internally beforehand to kind of go through the motion and figure out how it works. But this was kind of the jumping off point. And it became a really fantastic story. So we put out the call, we had a series of conversations. We were able to host them at the library. The library we have in downtown Concord has some community meeting space, so it was a great place to have it. And it was amazing because the people of Concord got really fired up right away, and they really wanted to do something right away, which was pretty exciting. So they put it all together. We had these conversations in winter of 18, sorry. Winter of 18, and they got going with it right away, and they put together a bunch of stuff so that by the time the year was closing out, this was like January, February of 18, so by December of 18, they had continued meeting after our regular conversations, the members of the community. They put together this big Christmas event for the village, and they did this big Christmas light contest where they would put up the Christmas lights and everyone would vote on it. We always do a holiday program at the Concord Library around that time, so they kind of asked if they could use that as their award ceremony, and it turned up to this big event, hundreds of people coming for this tiny community, which was a lot. And a lot of the town decorated the Christmas lights. They voted, and the story that kind of was fantastic on it is there's a business that's a neighboring property to the library, and the relationship with that business owner has been through the years, it has been a little contentious, parking and shoveling and all that kind of stuff that comes with being neighbors. And this person, he did the Christmas lights, and he won the Christmas light contest. But even before he knew he was winning, he was so excited about this whole event that he volunteered to be Santa. So he was Santa at our event, and he won. And then he promised to be Santa every year going forward after this for this big event. And I like to think that his little heart grew 3 sizes that Christmas. It was fun. It was a great way to bring the community together, and they're continuing to meet and to plan more community events. The library's asked the table every time, and they haven't been sort of Harwood conversations anymore, but they're community planning conversations, and it was nice to be a catalyst for that. So that was kind of our success story, and that gave us a little bit of confidence in how we can do it, how we can make this happen. We're very fortunate in Jackson that the library's been part of this larger community group that's loosely called the Jackson Collaborative Network. That's a series of nonprofits in the area, all working on ways to improve our community. So we're already a part of this group, and that group was able to get some funding to have some kind of community learning initiative. And the various constituents of the group could apply for this grant. It's a fairly modest grant, but to get some funding to go and learn more about their communities. And it was, it just kind of felt like a natural thing for us to raise our hand and say, hey, we have staff trained on how to hold some of these conversations. We'd love to do it. We were one of the applicants, but we'd also be a resource to help some of these other groups do their work. So we got a grant to do another series of conversations in our Springport, Michigan community. And the way we got the grant is by working with another community partner that was also interested in the Springport community. So we have a little library there, and this is a smaller rural community, smaller than Concord. It's about 3,000 people for the whole township. The Jackson County Health Department was also very interested in learning more about that township and the village of Springport. They don't have any resources on site there, and they want to know how they could help the people there. So it was great for us to come together and say, hey, we know how to do this thing. We have some resources in town to make it happen. So we applied for the grant, we got that, we started those conversations. And but alongside this, we had put ourselves out there as a potential resource, and another group that was doing conversations within the wards of the actual city of Jackson itself, they reached out to us for help on how to conduct their conversations. So we sort of, we attended those and would serve as conversation leaders at these neighbor to neighbor events that took place this past late winter, early spring of 19. And we're working on the Springport conversations now. Just before this webinar, I wanted to check in with one of our staff that led the conversation last night. It was our 6th conversation in Springport. But it's only the 4th one that we actually had people show up. We did a number of these conversations, and there's a couple no-shows, and it felt like it took some time to get traction. But last night was apparently the best one we've had so far. We had 11 people show up. They were very enthusiastic. The police chief got all excited, and he's going to take our librarian around town to visit more people and talk to them. And so we feel like we kind of turned a corner there, and we're starting to learn a little bit more about the Springport community.
So Jason, let me ask you, we've got a question from somebody who actually grew up in Concord.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, they haven't been there in 45 years though, but they're wondering, and I was wondering if you could describe for people the nature of that group that came together from the first conversation, a little bit about who they were and how they're still meeting, and how the fact of they're still meeting together, how it's really sort of shaping each other's efforts in Concord. And
Yeah.
is the library leading that, or is it just part of it?
I think it's probably fair to say that I don't think we're leading it per se. I think that we have a guiding role in it. But I feel like our role was really more of the catalyst of creating the space and opening up the conversations for folks. So the sort of the core group is sort of local VIPs, right? The village manager, the township supervisor, the school superintendent, a few local business owners, people that already kind of had a stake in the community and the environment. And over time, they brought in some more people as it goes along. But I think those are the main collaborators. And now the village and the school system are both working on some strategic planning, and they're incorporating a lot of the knowledge that we gained during the Harwood conversations into that. And the library's been at the table again every time for this, and they want to engage people. And they've expressed that they wouldn't necessarily have thought about all these other people to engage in their strategic planning process without having had these conversations and meeting them at the table.
Yeah, so it's a good example of just creating a space for people to get together. We talk about having, sort of intentionally creating informal networks and links that may not have existed together, and how people create sharing across those boundaries. It's like a boundary spanning place. Yeah. Where you have the township and the library and the schools coming together. And I know from what Jason's told me in the past, this has had some implications for the school strategic planning. It's had implications for the township. It's had implications for the library. And yeah, so any questions for Jason? So where to from here, Jason?
Well, that's a great question. So I said we have a team of 7. We're doing these conversations now, and we're involved in some other things. And we realized that we really like this work. It's been really meaningful, and I think really important for how we shape where the library's future is going. So we want to continue and expand. So kind of our next step, where we're at right now, is we're starting to train more of our staff at JDL how to have these conversations. So we're bringing more people onto the Harwood team. We're trying to figure out how to give people training and bring them on. So for Springport, we brought in the manager of our library out there and one of her staff members. So they've kind of been inducted in, and then the manager of our Concord library also manages a small branch in Hanover, Michigan, which is just south of Concord. And they want to do conversations there. So she's starting to bring some of her staff at Hanover into the Harwood process so they can start having conversations there. Another member of our team is our youth services coordinator, and she's really interested in talking to the school systems throughout Jackson County. So she's working with one of our other branch managers to bring her up to speed so they can start having some conversations with the superintendent and school board of the school in that area.
Very good. Let me see.
And I'm getting I have a small audience that's off camera, and they also reminded me that
okay,
that we also are doing the innovation space process through Harwood. Mm-hmm. And, we started that working on our library card policies and trying to remove some barriers to staff. So we created an innovation space to work on that. And it's been really successful. We came up with some really great new card policies, and it was a great way to get frontline staff involved and really get their thoughts and opinions on how we do things. So we're going to continue this. We've made it a standing monthly innovation space, and we'll bring various topics to frontline staff and let them work through that.
Very cool. So we have another question here. It's a bit curious about your Christmas event. What was it called? Was it a contest type event? How many people participated?
It was called Light Up Concord. And it was the event that was at the library was the Holiday Open House, which is our annual event that we have there. But the Light Up Concord was the big contest to decorate your house or your business in the village of Concord for this. I think we had yeah, I think it was like 30-ish participants. So those would be local businesses or homeowners that decorated their houses. And then,
That's a big deal for Concord.
it's a pretty big deal for a little town. I think that the village itself has a population of about 1,000 within the village limits. I think the whole township's 3,000, so it's a fairly small community. And at the big unveiling Christmas event, I know we had over 200 people, which is a lot of people for our little library there.
Mm-hmm. And then we have a couple other questions. One of them I'm going to address, and the other one here is, have you met with resistance within the library? And if so, how have you handled it?
Within the organization itself?
I think so. It says resistance within the library.
I don't think we had any resistance. I think it's been a little bit of work on our part, sort of educating our staff on what this process is. Like I said, the JDL staff, the Harwood trained staff, they're kind of their first forays into this. We're having conversations with some of our staff about the community they wanted to live in. And we've since incorporated Harwood into our staff days. So by this point, most of our staff at JDL have participated in a Harwood conversation of some sort. And we've also presented on what the Harwood process is, what we're trying to do, what other libraries in Michigan have done with this at staff day. So I don't think we've had resistance at all. I think it's just been a matter of educating people and helping them see what exactly it is that we're trying to do.
Okay. So one other question here. It says, for those not familiar, can you say what the conversations are about? Who determines the topic?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So we use the 10-question format with the aspirations, with the first question of what kind of community do you want to live in? And then we try to follow it's a combination of following the flow of the narrative of what people are talking about and interested in, and trying to work in the Harwood questions to move it on to the next step and talk about what do they see the barriers, who in their community do they trust to lead the change, what would success look like, kind of thing. So we usually set up, we have one person going through the questions and being the facilitator of the conversation, and then we have ideally a couple people on hand to take notes as the conversation goes along and to help kind of redirect the flow if it gets off too much in one direction.
Cool.
Is that an answer, or do you want more specifics about
I think that's okay. If the person asking that wants more specifics, what I would suggest to them, they can probably go to the Harwood website, or they can Google Harwood Community Conversations, and you'll be able to find the template for the 10 questions that Jason's talking about. These questions, we call them community conversations, and they've been used with United Ways, with public broadcasting, with municipal governments. They've been used all over the world, and lots and lots of libraries, and you can find them pretty easily on the web. It's just 10 questions. It starts with, what kind of a community do you want? And then it gets into the issues and concerns relative to realizing those aspirations. So anyway, thank you, Jason.
Yeah.
Great. And we're going to move on now to our next presenter, if I can get my slides to move. Elisabeth Miranda from Blossburg Memorial Library in Pennsylvania. This is a rural library in the heart of Blossburg, a small town with a population of under 2,000 in north central PA. It's, as she described to me, it's a small town with a big heart, and the library is central to people's lives there. Mm-hmm. So, Liz, over to you.
Okay, hi everybody. All right, so we're about 19 months into our journey with the Turning Outward initiative. And like Carlton said, Blossburg is a very, very small town, and it is a very rural area. Our population is about 1,500 actually. And that means we're very steeped in tradition. We don't like change. So our first major step was building our team. That was really crucial to us. And as soon as I heard about this initiative, I was really excited. I knew that this could help get our town on track. Things were starting to happen in town. We're seeing pockets of change, but not a lot of communications and coordination. So I knew right away this could help us. My challenge here was how to put a team together, as our library has a staff of one, me. All right, to be fair, I do have one evening closer who's very, very part-time, and I have some awesome volunteers who help keep things moving for us. But I brought this to Shane, who is our board president, but he also happens to be the mayor of Blossburg. That really helped us a lot. So we discussed it and agreed that this could be incredible for our community. So we set to work at putting together the rest of the team. We found 3 other involved community members with various degrees of interest and involvement in the library. But the key was that they're all very involved community members. So these are people on Borough Council. They're people on VIBE, which is something, it's kind of our version of the Chamber of Commerce. It's short for Visions in Business and Entertainment. People who are on other boards, on other committees and other groups in Blossburg. So Tanya is on Borough Council. She's part of VIBE, and she's also a local business owner. And Shane, our mayor, they've been really the most involved from our team with me in this process. So once that happened, the next big step for us was starting these community conversations that Jason just talked about at his libraries. We had a really easy time of doing the ask questions, which is something you can do as a precursor to the community conversations. And in fact, we were able to poll over 10% of our population, which is easy when you have such a small town. But we got bogged down after that in planning. We wanted things perfect, and we wanted to invite the right people, and we wanted to have it at the right time on the right day. So in the end, Bill, who was our Harwood coach, said to us, just do it. And that's kind of become our motto, I guess. We just kind of dive in and do things. So we finally chose a day and got the word out to people we knew, people we had ties to start out with. They were either leaders or they had leadership potential at their various businesses and organizations. And we also tried to invite some newcomers to Blossburg. So we actually had great response, and we heard some really interesting things about what feeling welcome to a community really looks like. We've continued our conversations with different groups, and we've actually had 7 altogether by now. They've all had like 20-something people. The smallest one we had 10, but most of the others have had about 20. We had one with seniors, and we've even had one with teenagers, teens and tweens. We also had one around kind of a hot topic, which I'll discuss more, which had over 40 people show up for. So towards the end of 2018, this hot topic conversation happened because we wanted to address some negative rumors going on around town, and decided to hold a community conversation using the practice, but specifically designed to address these hot topics in the community. And even from that conversation, from all of our conversations, we heard almost the same things from people, that they were looking for a welcoming, thriving, supportive, caring, and connected community with opportunities for people of all ages. And their concerns were lack of communication, shortage of community members wanting to be engaged. They discussed lack of communications between organizations and the need for greater public awareness of community happenings. And people believed that we need to focus on improved coordinated communications, specifically regarding events and activities, and creating more awareness and opportunities for people of all ages to get more involved in the community. So based on our responses to these learnings, our turning outward efforts have really started to spread outside of the library. We started inside and we've really spread outside, and it's happened in so many ways. And interestingly enough, that hot topic conversation and the teen conversation have had the most impact on our practice and on the community so far. So I'm going to come back to those in a second, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more about ways that we've affected some things in the community. So Shane and Tanya, throughout the process, they bring up turning outward at every single Borough Council meeting. And I go to Borough Council meetings when I can. I can't always make it, but it's nice to show up once in a while so people know who I am and who the library is. But Shane and Tanya do discuss turning outward at every single meeting. And so that brings the process and the practice to council members. It brings it to borough employees and to members of the public who attend the meeting. But it also brings it to local press that come to the meeting. So the press has been very interested in this, and they've written a couple of articles about our progress in this initiative, which is really awesome at getting the word out to more people. So Shane has started telling people that his goals as a mayor have shifted due to this practice. He used to think he would be more successful if he accomplished things like get more businesses in town, get more people to move to town, fix roads, work on environmental issues, things like that. But he's come to realize that the more important thing is how people speak to each other and engage with each other, how we interact as human beings, and how we handle disagreements and conflict and even crises. So he has shifted how he speaks to people like the borough employees, local police, other community organizations. And from this top-down shift, we're seeing a community-wide shift. It's slow, but we can see it in a lot of ways, and it's contagious. So it just so happened that about a year ago, the borough moved their offices to a new building. And Shane and Tanya's vision was to have a more welcoming and public-friendly building modeled on how welcoming the library is. But not all borough employees kind of agreed with this vision and didn't see a need for a change, didn't see a need to be more welcoming. So eventually they kind of chose not to get on board and left their positions. And I am leaving out a lot of drama behind that. A new frontline employee was hired for the borough, and she's actually somebody who attended one of our community conversations, which is awesome. We think it's okay to lose people along the way. Everybody isn't always ready for change, and we're happy that people who are ready for progress are stepping up. So when people come into the borough building now, they can walk in and they're greeted with a hello and a smile and no locked doors. The public is greeted before a council meeting and welcomed, again, with no locked doors. So this is a small change, but it's had a huge impact. Also, somebody had asked during one of our community conversations how people get onto local boards and committees, and we realized that the norm is somebody prominent just gets asked, and that process needs to change. So now every committee or board position in the borough and at the library is advertised. So people can apply for the positions and more people feel like they're welcome and part of the process. So around the same time the borough shifts were happening, council started working on a new town logo and slogan for the town to kind of reflect on positive changes being made. And they came up with small town, big heart. That was chosen to demonstrate our shift in becoming a more caring, open, and welcoming community. Then also around the same time, Tanya and I were having a conversation about how active people are and how engaged people are, and discussing how to increase participation and engagement. Tanya is very involved in VIBE. So we decided to form a partnership between VIBE and the library to, one, give the VIBE a more permanent home to meet because they don't have a physical location. So their home is now at the library. And so that we can jointly work on activities in the community together while we support each other. So we announced our partnership by jointly hosting this huge free ice cream social last summer. And it was a huge success. I mean, we saw over like 200 people there, which is huge for Blossburg. And it really increased awareness, what we're doing, and just what our two organizations are all about. So I'm going to go back to that hot topic community conversation. So key members from a local, it's a state festival, but it's in our town. The planning committee, they were in attendance at this conversation. And they had quite a lot of stuff to say about what's going on in the community. And it was not all good. In fact, it was quite negative. So, but we listened and we addressed issues and we reached out afterwards. And you know, this group, which they're typically seen as very separate and don't communicate effectively with other groups in the community, they've really started to come around. And by seeing how we are starting to communicate differently, intentionally, and using the practice, this group has come to all of us in different ways for help, for advice, for collaborating, for volunteers, and for further community involvement. So we're starting to be seen as partners rather than competing and feuding groups, which is really amazing. And then back to our teen and tween community conversation. That group was so into this that, and just the concept of community connectivity, that they've kind of turned into a library-sponsored leadership group. And they meet every other week very faithfully. And we have about 14 kids who come on a regular basis. And Shane, Tanya, and I have been volunteering our time to guide them and kind of help them to build leadership skills and work on projects on their own. So leadership from this state festival planning group that I just talked about heard about what we were doing with these teens because now we're communicating more effectively. And they came to one of our meetings and they actually invited our teens to run the beverage stand at this state festival. And they agreed that if they did that, they would split the proceeds for sales for the beverages with the teens. So the Coal Festival would get half, and the teens would get half to work on other community projects. And the teens actually made over $450. They did it all on their own last month. They ordered beverages, they set up a change box, they made signage, they did a schedule for coverage during a 3-day festival, and every shift was covered. They did it all by themselves. So they've now been asked to do this at 2 other local events, and they're learning about business along with leadership skills in this process. And they've come up with a name for themselves, which is CATCH, which stands for Community and Teens Combining Hearts. And last night they started, for the first time they had a communications meeting to start coming up with a communications plan. And they worked on a mission statement. And I checked in on them, and they had a draft of a mission statement, which is CATCH is an organization of teens affiliated with the Blossburg Memorial Library who wish to increase community involvement. That's amazing to me that this is what teens want, and it's what everybody else wants, and they recognize this. So having a small staff has really worked well for us in this process. It might work, you'd think it would work against us, but since the practice is so much more easily spread by having outside people involved in it, it's really worked well for us. We've started to invite others to join us in our innovation space meetings, which Jason mentioned just before also, and we love those meetings. We really get into deep conversations about our learnings, but we also take time to reflect and discuss internal learnings we've had and observations and realizations that we each come to. And we also challenge each other, which helps kind of keep things real. For instance, the other day, we had a chat about fear and how those who like to do things the same way, they may have a change of fear, a fear of change and the unknown. And so we challenged each other to do something in the community which we each had fear about, so that we could talk about our feelings with each other and talk about empathy and just have more empathy for others. And that's worked well for us. So for the future, we want to continue, obviously, and spread and grow. We want to continue building new and future leaders. We want to continue building new partnerships, empowering others to take on projects and to find new ways to engage others, and to keep learning and challenging others. And I actually just created a Summer Quest library and community challenge for adults and teens. It's kind of like a summer learning program, but for adults, and it's a virtual program. They do it on their own. I'm giving participants a ticket booklet of 30 challenges, and they can do these both at the library, but in the community. A lot of them are things to do with the community, and it incorporates the concept of being turned outward. So the carrot is that they can be entered for prizes by completing each challenge in the booklet. But to me, the real prize is that they're becoming more engaged and connected in the community as they go along doing these challenges. So it's win-win. We're all winners in this. And that's really the way I feel about the initiative and the practice overall. It's been awesome for me and for our library and for Blossburg, and we're all winners.
I started talking and I realized my audio was off. Yeah, so just a couple questions. One of them is the other organization you mentioned, I think it was Vibe. And what is Vibe?
All right, so we don't have a chamber of commerce in our town. They've traditionally had a group of involved, not only business leaders, but just involved individuals. And it's called Vibe, which stands for, well, it's Blossburg specifically, Visions in Business and Entertainment.
Okay, so it's kind of like a corollary to a chamber, but in Blossburg?
Yes.
Sort of. Okay.
Sort of.
Yeah. And then another question. How do you keep people informed? And maybe I'm thinking we might come back to this at the end instead, where we'll ask Jason and Sarabeth and you together on this question of how do you keep people informed on how things are going and the progress that's being made? Because you've obviously had a ripple effect there.
Yeah.
And keeping people informed of what's going on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold that question and I'll circle back to it at the end for all three of you. Another question is, what is Innovation Spaces? And a little bit about this challenge booklet, specifics in terms of what are some of the specific challenges included. And then also, what are Innovation Spaces? Maybe talk about that.
Well, the innovation space was just introduced to us recently at our latest Harwood training. And they kind of described it as we get the secret sauce finally. And it's kind of a format to have conversations with our team to discuss our learnings, and so that we can learn more about what's going on from what each other are learning. So it's guiding us in conversation and kind of a format to just help us keep things going, keep us motivated, and to motivate each other. And there is a format for doing it, just like the community conversations. We frequently move away from format a little bit, but we really enjoy doing them because they help us think and process, and we all like sharing with each other. So the Summer Quest ticket program that I have done, the challenge, and I've basically put it out, and we communicate a lot on Facebook. I put a lot of things out on Facebook. Anybody can check the Blasberg Memorial Library's Facebook page. I post a lot of things, and I'm posting myself doing every single challenge in the book this summer, so that it encourages and inspires people to do these different engaging things in the community. So one of the things is like do a good deed for a neighbor. There's things like attend an adult program at the Blossburg Memorial Library, like read a nonfiction book from the library. But we get into things, one is specifically coming in the library and asking me how they can be more turned outward. Some are introduce yourself to a neighbor that you've never met before. Donate food to a local food pantry. Walk into a business that you've never been into before and introduce yourself. Just say hi. Post something nice about somebody else on social media, because these are things that we see happening, negative things, and we're just trying to find ways to combat negativity and be positive. Thank a police officer for their services. So there's other things like attend a concert. We are having concerts in Blossburg that will be free. So there's a lot of entertainment type of things, but a lot of do-gooder type of kindness activities, and just getting involved in the community, pick up trash in the community, different things like that.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Okay, so we're going to circle back to this question about how do you keep people informed. And let's move on now to Sarabeth. And let me see if I can get her image up on the screen. And while they're doing that, Sarabeth is the director of the Sarasota County Libraries and Historical Resources. And this is in Sarasota, Florida. They've got 420,000 residents, so it's a bit different size than Blossburg. Plus an annual influx of about 100,000 seasonal residents and tourists. And between 2015 and 2018, they had 3 new library buildings opened, including a partnership branch at a technical college and 2 replacement facilities. And let me see, Paige, can you get Sarabeth up for us?
Good afternoon, everybody.
There you go. Hi.
And thank you, Carlton, for inviting me, and Jason and Elisabeth. I've really enjoyed hearing about your journey. I'll say from the beginning, this is something that we realize there's not a finish line, that we keep learning, and the journey winds and takes some unexpected turns sometimes and keeps evolving. I began reading about the Harwood practices back in 2012. I'd previously been involved in a broadcasting career, and there was a book, Why We're Here, kind of a case study about public broadcasters and turning outward. So that was my initial introduction, and then had an opportunity along with some coworkers to attend Innovator Labs and to meet Rich when he visited here in Sarasota. And then between really 2012 and right up until a couple of months ago, we have continued to either send staff to labs, or there have been labs conducted here in Sarasota. One memorable one when we were given the opportunity to send 40 people from our county organization and 40 people from our neighboring county in Manatee County came together in a lab. What this looked like for us to begin with, we certainly encouraged everyone in the organization to become acquainted with Harwood. We have universal goals for all staff, so we folded in some getting familiar with Harwood practices into that. That helped. It's hard to describe what this is to folks who haven't been to one of the labs. We realized that pretty quickly. And we also realized that conducting some of the effort from the center out maybe had to be flipped around, and we had to start putting some of the accountability and responsibility from out in the field to interpret this their way for their particular library branch or at historical resources. When we conducted community conversations to begin with, I think we struck on something that was successful for us, and that was really conducting conversations with organizations that were already partners with us. So our Head Start providers in the county, they were going through a strategic planning, and our community conversations really informed that process. It also brought out some interesting information and some unexpected information, kind of busted some myths, I think, in our community. We also reached out to organizations serving seniors, universities, colleges, and then really the communities around each library, the neighborhoods. Conversations were conducted there. And then, you know, I think just as a natural process, we started sharing the information that we derived from those conversations. Sometimes in just networking meetings with other community organizations, we're often invited to the table. And it was always interesting to us that it was service providers almost exclusively around the table, rather than including some folks that we were hoping to serve. So in the middle of those meetings, sometimes we would be talking about something that everyone was really committed to doing, when all of a sudden we realized, well, we probably haven't got all the information we need. And it was great for those of us who were there, who had participated in the conversations. Very powerful to be able to say, you know, we've been listening to folks in the community. And then everybody would get quiet and they would lean forward and ask us, well, what did you hear? And that started to reflect on the libraries as a real partner in bringing that information back, and a trusted, reliable, objective source of public knowledge. I will reinforce again this, there's been nothing linear about our path with the Harwood practices, certainly not without some challenges. And so what we kept asking people involved from our organization is to be committed to the process and to just stick with it, not to view it as a separate project, separate from what they do every day, and not as another thing on top of what they do every day, but a totally different way of listening and learning and folding in information that helps us plan. We are really intent upon planning, decision-making, and involving all staff, and it really makes sense for us that they hear firsthand from our community members what their aspirations are. I think we got some real traction when people started seeing the practical applications of, this is what we heard, and as a result, we're making this maybe seemingly incremental or small change in a service or a program. But then they saw that it was actually a well-informed decision, and it really worked. So I think that confidence really kind of spurred us on. I think we've matured a little bit in our approach to all of this, and more people in the county organization have been involved. Sharing the stories has been very important. So encouraging people to talk about what did you learn, what are you applying. Those innovation spaces certainly have contributed to those kinds of opportunities. There were people from other departments in the county organization that participated in labs. So in our bigger government organization, I think that was really key. For example, people from our human resources attended and participated. So they helped us create some interview questions that would kind of tap into either an applicant's previous experience in turning outward or sort of their natural inclination to turn outward. And I think that's really helped us from the beginning. When we hire people, we think they're predisposed to be part of this turning outward. And with our neighborhood services colleagues, I will tell you, they helped us very specifically during what was an initially very contentious closing of a library due to a problem with mold. We were so fortunate that so many of us had kind of honed our Harwood skills and had access to the tools, because there was really anger and mistrust in the community. And we were able to turn that around with the help of lots of folks who had participated in the Harwood labs, not just library staff. Recently, 15 people from Sarasota County participated in the virtual labs, and many more from an organization, the Patterson Foundation, our Campaign for Grade Level Reading, our Age-Friendly Initiative. So now the number keeps growing of folks who really have adopted this and are practicing it. That helps all of us who have already been in the trenches, and it also makes our conversations richer when we come together and say, what are we learning about all of this? I'll point out one of the challenges that we faced, because I think this is really, when you talk about alliances, this is really important. There was some, early on, there was some, I think, some initial caution from our administration about if we go out and ask people what they aspire to, aren't they going to have expectations of us? And aren't they going to think, well, you asked us, what are you going to deliver? And so there was some reservations. We really saw this as part of strategic planning and just a solid practice. So we were pretty tenacious and kept edging our way. And I will say that with some recent changes in administration, it's like this is part of what they have always believed in. This is part of what they have always practiced in their leadership. So what a relief to all of us that we now have that support internally. I will also say that folks from Harwood have been incredibly supportive. They encourage us, they inspire us, they support us, and they prompt us. Every time we have a conversation about Harwood practices, we remember Bill Booth and his continuous questioning. Well, what do you make of that, Sarabeth? And my closest ally in this, Ann Hardy. Ann, what meaning can you take from this? So a reminder that we really do rely on Harwood folks to help us in this journey. I think there are a couple of things that have changed dramatically for us. The first is sort of a mindfulness and intentionality in every aspect of providing services. One of our library customer service representatives described it as showing up, where she's a stellar public servant. But she said in the past, she saw questions or requests from the community as being more transactional. And as they were describing something they requested, she was already thinking of the answer. She already sort of had this agenda. And instead of listening deeply and becoming more familiar with the individual's personal goals, and that's what she does now. She said she doesn't rush to answer, but instead she's learning more and she's developing relationships. And ultimately, that's what we're really talking about over and over again. It's sort of our mantra. It's not transactional, it's about relationships. And then the second part of that, really, I'll go back to the practical, effective changes to our programs and our services, planning and evaluating. I think in the past, we were more focused in the beginning of making a change, of looking internally at library research. We'd ask library colleagues. We didn't so often ask people in the community. So we would initiate a change, and then of course we would evaluate after the fact. So we've made this change, what did you think about it? Instead now, we are more likely to ask in the beginning, if we were to make this change, or what do you think about this particular service or this impact on your family? And so we're moving forward in the planning with that initial knowledge from the community. When we think about what's next, we have had the just great good fortunate experience to have a grant with some makerspace creation stations. And I will tell you, I wouldn't have necessarily known this was going to be a connection to Harwood practices. But what is happening in that initiative, there's an environment where people come together and connect over learning and talking and socializing. And I think over decades of time that I've been working in libraries, we've always asked ourselves, so how do we get these intergenerational activities? How do we get people from different backgrounds to come together? Well, in these maker spaces, it's happening just organically. And when we see the impact of relationship building and socializing and engagement, that's really been kind of a great side effect of all this. And we've capitalized on it because of our Harwood training. I would say, I'll wrap up because I know you want to be able to take some questions, but some of the things that both Jason and Elisabeth talked about in terms of what they heard from the community, we heard the same things, and it's incredible. You know, people want opportunities and they want access. They think nostalgically sometimes about what it was like for them to grow up in a community. So some people talk about, I'd really like for my kids to experience the same thing, the safety in a community, to be able to go ride their bicycle, to participate in activities. We also heard strongly that people want their voice to be heard, they want to be respected, and they want to feel like their ideas are really valued and welcomed. We also heard that people are eager for interacting with people of diverse backgrounds. They have a perspective that in our community, perhaps things are segmented a bit, and there are, areas with gates, and certain people live in those gated communities and other people live in other parts of the community. They really want to see activities that bring all kinds of people together and help them interact. I hope there are some questions, and I'm ready if there's anything you want to hear.
Well, we have one inquiry. Actually, you mentioned interview questions in HR to help you get people, I guess you would say, that are more inclined to be turned outward as staff. And I was wondering either if you could talk a little more about that, or even is there a way that you could share some of those?
I'll be glad to share that. I think this is being recorded, and as part of that, I can I can pitch some of those questions, but how important it is to find that out as people are coming aboard, because if we have an expectation, we have an expectation of high participation from our staff. They're not sitting on the sidelines. Their ideas are encouraged and expected. So this is all part and parcel of that. And it includes having the desire to go out into the community and interact with people and invite their feedback. So yeah, we get started early on with the interview.
Yeah, and I would expect that's part of your orientation process?
It is, and we're just kind of revising. Jason talked about a staff development day, a staff learning day. We're getting ready to offer one of our annual learning activities that everybody attends, certainly planning something related to Harwood at that.
Mm-hmm. And one other thing, these are sort of linked here. You talked about how the closing and how people were angry. And the question is, could you talk a little bit more about how you worked through that? And I know you also referenced neighborhood services being helpful. And right. Maybe you could describe just what neighborhood services are, because I'm not sure that's a term that everybody would have the right understanding of.
So our neighborhood services is part of our planning and development department. And they have for decades been the leaders in community engagement. And I know that their philosophy is, let's go talk with people in advance, like all the time. Let's talk to people, not just necessarily when there's an issue or something contentious that bubbles up. So when we had this really incredibly negative reaction to the news that the building had to be closed, it's a beloved library. People were so angry that it was hard to imagine that we could turn a corner. But we got everyone in the county, in particular neighborhood services, but lots of folks in the county who were strong facilitators. And we pulled them all together and talked about, okay, our end goal is to have all these people who are angry help us design and create the next building, the next facility. So we very, very carefully scripted and scribed that next opportunity for people to come out. The first time people were just venting, and it was excruciating, and that wasn't necessarily very productive. So at the next meeting, people were around tables. There were scribes and facilitators. We asked them, what experience have you had in the library that informs what you want in your next library? What do you do at the library that you value? What kinds of services and programs and features? So we really just had them dive right in. And at every table, we had folks who we had invited from our community partners to help us help the angry people kind of turn the corner and look to the future. That was really incredible. And we had no fewer than 30 community engagement opportunities for people as we stepped through the design and the building process. We also got, we also were really smart about some of the things that we did to help people understand that we were serious and that we were to be trusted and we were going to build a new library. So we opened a temporary library very quickly. We kept inviting people back to get updates. We had a website with tons of information, spoke at community activities and events. So fairly quickly we turned the corner on that. But so many of the Harwood tools that folks become familiar with as they participate in a lab, we use those to great advantage.
Okay, I tell you, we've got a couple other questions here, but I think that they're going to be appropriate for the one where we get everybody together. So I'm going to hold it for that, but let me just read this real quick here. Let's see. Yeah, one just observation. Jean Albano from Springfield, Massachusetts has been in this work for a while, and she's just commenting that they include job postings that have turned out where it approaches ideal. And they actually include that in job postings with a link to the definition. And then during the interview process, they probe for evidence of that approach with questions like, what does the community engagement mean for the library? What does it mean for you? What does it look like? So that's just one idea from somebody that's a practitioner in this for quite a while. So anyway, thank you very much, Sarabeth. I'm going to move on to get all our panelists up here, and maybe Paige can help with that. I'm not quite, I think I know how to do it. There, is that everybody on screen? So we have a couple questions that I've asked them to address. And then we have a couple more questions. Let me sort of pick up on just what Sarabeth talked about first. There was a question about equity and let me see, I'm going to pull it together. It says, how have you incorporated equity into your process? Not so much about diversity, but more about elevating voices not heard, and maybe more than the voices that you always hear. How have you addressed issues of equity?
And are you asking me to?
Oh, this is for the panel, all three of you. So any of you can chime in.
I'll defer to my colleagues here for a minute.
I can talk a little bit about it because it's something that we're struggling with this most recent round of Springport conversations that we're having. I mentioned there it was hard to get people to attend at the first few meetings, and the people that attended were the local busybodies, the local players, the local people of note, the township supervisors, village managers and stuff. And one of the things that came out of those conversations with them is that there's a large population of the community that are renters, that are low income, and that, you know, they don't come to the table, they're not involved in things. And I think one of the turning points we've had there that made this recent conversation last night so good is that 2 weekends ago, they had their big community annual summer event downtown. They close off the streets. They do a big giant program. And we had our staff there on the ground, walking around, talking to people and telling them about the process, about what it is. And it sounds like we got more of a diverse group for that community into our latest conversation. We heard some voices that wouldn't normally come to the table.
Other thoughts?
Well, I'm just going to pitch in that recently we were asked by a network, a new initiative that brings together over 30 community groups called the First 1,000 Days. And because they had heard and are familiar with the fact that library staff have conducted community conversations, they asked us to conduct more. And they are very focused on groups that I would say may have been or have felt marginalized. So there are folks for whom English is not their first language, and we will conduct some conversations with them. Fathers, teen parents. So I think as we continue to do the conversations, there are some very obvious audiences, but then I think it's really incumbent on us to keep informing ourselves in other ways by inviting groups that may not step forward to participate unless we really encourage them. And that's where some of those partnerships can really help. So would the Head Start parents have come to our community conversations if it was just a general invitation? Probably not. But we talked with the staff at Head Start, and they invited families, and we had a meal and we had childcare. So, you know, all of those details really make it possible for people to feel, you know, that real personal invitation. I think that's so important. You really invite them and say, we need to hear from you. I
see the heads nodding over the personal invitation comment. And I just know that in my coaching, that becomes such a dominant thing that, you know, it's who haven't you heard? What voices do you actually need to hear to be able to say you can live into that authority test? of being able to go into the community and tell them their aspirations, and they'll look at you and they'll shake their head, yes, you understand me. Who haven't you talked to? And then, you know, quite often you're not going to know everybody, but you'll know people who do know those community, and you can ask those people to help you reach people like the Head Start group you just mentioned. Let me move on to another question. Earlier on, there was one on how do you keep people informed of the progress you're making?
You know, for us, that's kind of been a struggle, actually. And we're working on telling our story. We're working on, I guess, putting our stories together so that we can better share our stories that we have and highlight all the people who have been touched by this, kind of make it individual. We haven't had a specific meeting where people came back and we reported to them. We've been doing things a little more informally. We'd like to do something like that at perhaps a community potluck dinner and bring people back and bring some new people in to communicate with them. But we have been, like Jason said, also going to events and walking around and talking to people and sharing things informally through informal network, sharing things, and just trying to talk to as many groups as possible. We've gone out and visited others and talked to them too. And by keeping things, keeping Borough Council informed, really, it is getting out in the newspapers also. And a lot of people are really hearing about what we're doing. And of course now with my little ticket initiative, I have people coming in and asking me what's going on too. So, and we share things on Facebook and get it out there in a very informal and kind of fun way to make it interesting and appealing for people.
Any other thoughts, Jason or Sarabeth?
So
how do you keep people informed?
I would echo that it's been a bit of a challenge on figuring out the best way to make that happen. With our Concord conversations, we did have kind of a follow-up meeting where we reported back and said, this is what we think we heard you say, and it helped us with a little bit of calibration. And then we were able to put together some final documents about the summary of the conversations that we had and the community knowledge that we gathered, and have shared those back with the school system and the village and the township as they do their strategic planning. Some of the other projects we have going on, where we've been talking recently that we're kind of at the point where we probably need to host a Harwood conversation site on our website, or have some kind of public forum where we can post out the information we're learning about our communities as we go.
I would echo that this has been, I think among the most challenging aspects of this. Our organization has a fairly formal approach to communication. And so I think, we've struggled a bit with what's the right vehicle for getting the word out there. For me, it's telling the stories when I'm with folks in the community, when I'm with other service providers, when I'm with community partners. I've certainly followed up with people who participated in community conversations to thank them and to let them know how much we appreciated that they were so forthcoming. And I will also say, for anyone who is the least bit hesitant about conducting conversations, the thing that rang true with every single group we encountered was how much they appreciated that we asked for their feedback, and they took it as a very as an immediate sign of respect, and that we were honoring their ideas and their perspective. That was really incredible. I think you go into this and you're not quite sure what to expect, but people were incredibly thoughtful and honest and sincere and authentic. There were amazing things that happened within the conversation activity that just have had a tremendous impact on me personally.
So I will offer one thing of my own observation with this thing about keeping people informed. It is often a challenge because this work kind of emerges and spreads, and there's a ripple effect, and it's sometimes hard to even keep track of everything that unfolds as a result of it. But I can point to one example of a library that did a really credible job of sort of monitoring, you know, starting with the conversation, what happened as a result of the conversation, what that led to, and they did a 1-year report. And it went back and said, we started here, and this is where we ended up. And it was an 8.5 sheet on 2 sides of the paper, and it was a 1-year report that was an outcome of the conversations. But it was all those little ripple effects. So people saw it started with the conversation, but what it led to was something that was actually quite big, but it happened in little steps. And that proved quite effective for them. So a couple other questions. One of them is real quick from the chat box is, if you're looking for a group that would be considered a strong ally in the community, what group or groups would you consider strong partners? For example, City Hall, Chamber, or Rotary, or would you even define it that way? What would you look for in a group that would be a good turned outward partner?
I think it's going to be entirely community dependent, right? I think the ones mentioned in the chat are good suggestions. Community service groups, local government. I think one of the things, I guess, that we learned during the course of conversations is you start to get a feel of who people trust in the community to do things and to drive things, and take care of things. So I would say if you're starting to hear the same name or the same organization pop up over and over again in your initial conversations, that's someone you definitely need to bring in and try to build a partnership with.
I think for us, we look for, and of course there's limited organizations in our community since it's small, but we look for those where we already have cheerleaders involved in that organization, allies, friends, and then we build on those relationships. So we get invited and come and speak using the connections we already have.
Yeah, I think that there's a ripple effect in that too. When we're in meetings with lots of community partners, and the discussion turns back to what do we know about our community to inform us of how we want to serve. You just make new acquaintances, and when people hear that you're in the conversations and they hear even a little bit about what feedback you're getting, they get really interested. And then if you can invite them to help with the conversations, that kind of hooks them. I will tell you one thing really quickly about because I find the who do you trust in the community to be one of the most interesting questions, and the answers are somewhat surprising. So we're hearing very consistently that primarily people trust people who are in the same situation they're in. So not necessarily folks that are in an authority position or in an organization that you think is a community leader. If I'm a parent and I'm looking for opportunities for my child, I'm most likely to ask other parents. If I'm a senior citizen, I'm most likely to ask other people who are in the same kind of situation I'm in. And that was surprising to people in some of those situations where we shared the outcomes of the 10 questions with people.
So I tell you what, we're ending up here. This is great because we've got about 10 minutes left and we haven't gotten to the last lessons learned question. So I'm going to flip over to those real quick. What factors do you consider key to building allies in your efforts to be more turned outward? What are the factors that you think are really key that people need to take away from your experience?
Well, I think it's looking for people who also have an interest in and a passion for the community, right? And again, I think those people kind of bubble up as you start to have these conversations, but looking for, for other organizations that are interested, and then at least in our case, putting ourselves out there to say, hey, we can help have these conversations with you. We can help guide these conversations. We'd like to be at the table when you have your conversations, and just putting it out there that you're interested in learning alongside whoever else may be.
Other thoughts, Liz, Sarabeth?
I think we can get bogged down in details in this initiative, and we can overthink things. And as the great Bill told us, just do it. That really sounds so simple, and it's hard. It's hard. We get bogged down, and this is an organic initiative, and we become more turned outward and through the process, and we touch people, and through the process they become more turned outward, and you just have to dive in and start doing it. And for me, that was really the biggest key factor of everything. We like planning, and we like making things perfect, and this can be messy work, and that's okay, because we learn from the things that don't work too. And we learn from the angry people or the upset people or, the concerns. That's part of it. So, don't overthink and just do it. And that's my biggest, really, takeaway.
Anything else, Sarabeth?
I'm going to encourage, I think I realized with the contrast now of strong support from my county administrators, that was something that was really missing before, and now it's made a tremendous difference. Just to have folks who are keen on understanding anything about the Harwood practices, and then listening to the stories that provide evidence that there's, even if it's small incremental steps toward progress, we have those success stories, and we should be talking about them a lot. I also want to always have allies that do better what I don't do well. I'm reminded of sort of folks who look at community impact in a very, very, very focused way. And I love partnering with folks who are insistent that we are, sort of relentless in documenting and watching where the progress is, and pivoting and changing and adapting to be more effective. So those are some of the partners and allies that I want close by.
And then, so I'll just add one thing to that, just because I've noticed this in libraries. A lot of times libraries try to do this work all themselves. And always think about how can you make the community part of your effort. From the early get-go, de-silo the work and make the community part of it, and you'll find allies just in doing that. What advice do you have for libraries striving to strengthen their turned outward allies in the community? Any final pieces of advice for libraries that are trying to be more turned outward and striving to strengthen their efforts? Any final things?
Put yourself out there. Get out there and talk to people. Go to a borough council meeting. We're all busy. It's hard to find time, but it makes all the difference. I mean, it just makes all the difference in the world for people to know what you're about, what the library is about, and what this initiative is about. We're more than books. We are about engaging people. And once people realize that, this makes more sense to them.
So just show up.
That was going to be what I was going to say. Going up.
I think when our staff have that experience of participating and hearing, listening deeply and hearing, and then deriving the value of that information, there's nothing that can, if you have people who are not thinking positively about participating in the Harwood activities, you just need to have them have one of those experiences where they hear something that they weren't expecting to hear from a member of the community that we serve, and then that thoughtful deliberation in an innovation space, or however that happens, to say, as Bill Booth would say, so what do you make of that, and what are you going to do about it? Those weren't always the most welcome questions he would ask us, because it put the responsibility on us, but guess what? If you get out there and you listen and you hear something that can inform your decisions and your effectiveness, you should do something about it.
Okay, well, listen, thank you very much. I don't see any other questions. I will comment, we've mentioned a bunch of resources in this webinar here, and I work with Paige DeLoach on this, and we'll try to get those resources and materials mentioned in a follow-up email later today out for folks. But thank you very much to our panelists for taking the time for this. It's been really interesting, and thank you everybody for attending.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Oh, one more thing. I forgot almost. One more thing. Options to move forward. We have free 2 more webinars supporting a turned outward organizational structure in September. Then the library's role when disaster strikes in November. And we've had some people that have faced some natural disasters that have been working in a turned outward way. So that'll be pretty interesting. And then we have upcoming trainings, Public Innovators Lab in Georgia, October 15th through 17th. Public Innovators Virtual Lab, and Sarabeth mentioned she had a group attended that just recently. That's in fall 2019. And then Rich is on a national speaking tour. If you're interested in that, contact Colleen Bowman at the Institute. You'll see her email there. And then Rich is coming out with a new book, Stepping Forward, a practical, positive path to transform our community and our lives. And it's his newest book, and you can pre-order that. You see the text Step Forward to 66866. That's Step Forward to 66866, or visit theharwoodinstitute.org/steppingforward. And then just for more information about the Institute, you can always visit their website at www.theharwoodinstitute.org. Almost forgot to put that in there. That would have been a bad thing. So there's always a way to follow up on if you're interested in pursuing this further. I'd really encourage you to show up at future webinars, go to an upcoming training, get Rich on a speaking tour. I've done that a couple times. He's a really motivating speaker. And then I'm interested in seeing the book as well. I haven't seen that. So thanks very much, everybody, and appreciate you joining us today.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.